Welcome to NFL Daily, where we're standing by our evaluation of George Pickens in the draft class in 2022. I'm Gregg Rosenthal. I'm here with my friend Jon Ledyard from Audibles and Analytics. We had a whole plan for today's show, and it was thrown out the window when we got some rare breaking news in May. George Pickens to the Cowboys, and no one I wanted to talk to more than Jon Ledyard. What's going on, Jon?
Not too much, man. I appreciate you having me. Always excited and great to be able to talk some ball with you, especially a big Steelers trade. Not often that more often lately that we get these involving Steelers wide receivers. So it'll be fun to break it down with you.
Yes, it's been in my head that I overrated Pickens slightly. Had him second that year, I believe, behind Olave. Looking at Garrett Wilson and Drake London, how they've done, that was probably not the right choice, but always held out hope. And he's had a lot of production.
You're talking to a Traylon Burks wide receiver truther, so we'll feel the pain.
Look, Pickens is at least having a good career relatively, although you never want to get traded for a future third-round pick going into the fourth year of your career. Here's the trade. Okay. George Pickens and a sixth round pick in 2027 go to the Cowboys. They send back a third round pick in next year's draft, that's 2026, and a 2027 fifth round pick. That last extra pick was interesting to me. Essentially, the Cowboys, all they had to give up was a long trade down from the third to the sixth round in a future draft, and the Steelers get a fifth round pick back. What were your initial kind of big picture thoughts when this came down? Mine just very quickly was it actually makes sense for both sides, and it makes sense for me. Like, I'm just going to be more interested to watch the Cowboys this year. It'll be great for content, including today. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, the player type makes sense for Dallas. We can talk about the intricacies of Pickens specifically and how that all will play out no matter where he is. But if you're just saying, the Cowboys got a vertical wide receiver who can win back shoulder balls, can certainly win in contested catch situations, we'll talk a little bit about that and the numbers there being not quite what they were in his rookie year, but still I have hope that can be better. But I think the prototype makes sense for Dallas. The question to me is just, where do you consider the risk factor? And that's, to be honest with Dallas, though, like, haven't we been asking? We can't do both, right? We can't ask Jerry, take the risk, go out there and make a move. And he hasn't. And they've kind of been in this window where they should win and they don't win. And, so we've criticized for that. And then he goes out and he makes the move. And so I think from Dallas's perspective, you have to at least see the vision for it. It's a lot of risk, I think. And that's where I kind of come back to the concerns just with the profile of who Pickens is and where my concerns are there.
Yeah, and we'll get into all that, but I think if you look at the risk, there's a lot of things that have to be taken into account. Number one is his contract situation. He's entering the final year of his deal. According to Clarence Hill, who does a good job covering the team, the George Pickens is not looking to get a contract extension. He, quote, wants to show he's a top guy this year. So it doesn't sound like either side, I'm guessing, would be that interested in a contract now. It's going to be a wait and see, and the Cowboys, of course, have the franchise tag if he just totally balled out, and they could use it that way. So you're paying for 1 year of George Pickens, but what's the price? It's a third-round pick. That's a significant pick. I think it's interesting. We'll start, I guess, from the Cowboys side of it. I think it's pretty obvious the Steelers had a price for George Pickens. I heard coming into the draft, and Daniel Jeremiah alluded to it on our podcast together, that he was probably gone the second that DK Metcalf trade happened. But the Steelers established the price. I think they wanted a day 2 pick for him. They just did not get it. And so they held on. It sounds like this trade was in the works for a while. They felt like they had this coming, that, they would get their day 2 pick. It just was going to be in 2026. And to me, it's a fair price. It's like a fair price to take a shot on Pickens, considering it's only 1 round different than the pick you gave up for Jonathan Mingo. I mean, it's a much better value than that one, Jon.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that you're right. As soon as that trade was made for DK Metcalf, Pickens was done. It was just basically a matter of whether it would happen before the season, during the season, or after the season that he would leave, because this was it, 1 more year max for Pickens in Pittsburgh. So if you considered Pittsburgh a win now, this is a Super Bowl contending team. Pickens, obviously, there's no doubt losing Pickens is a talent deficit from where they were a couple hours ago. That part is true. That part I could agree with from a raw talent perspective. But how the pieces all fit together and whether Pittsburgh was actually in that sort of contending window, which I would say and have said for quite a while that they are not. And the best thing that they can do as an organization is recognize we actually aren't in that window. And even though we might get the last playoff spot, we actually aren't going to compete for anything, even to win that solitary playoff game. And so
they're not thinking that though, John. You know they're not thinking that.
Are they now though? Maybe, right? Like, could this be a sign that maybe they're starting to think, oh, look at next year's draft and what we could potentially do. Now they've got potentially 12 picks in that draft. So it's a possibility. Of course, they're going to go out and sign Aaron Rodgers, and everything I say is going to be completely rendered moot and irrelevant at that point because they'll be leaning back into the old way of doing things, and I'll be frustrated again. But I do think this is a move for the future, as well as considering we can't have two guys that are like this on our offense. Both guys, people will say their strengths are redundant. That is true, but I think that's more livable than their weaknesses being redundant. You can't have two guys that are going to fumble too often. You can't have two guys that are going to drop passes and make mistakes as route runners in terms of the spacing and understanding the construction of where they're supposed to be on the field in relationship to each other. Two guys, one guy like that you live for the splash plays, the big plays down the field, you can live with it. Two guys like that, I just think is too much. I just think that is a really difficult space to live in as an offense, especially when you are hopefully at some point going to be playing a young quarterback, whether it's Will Howard, and you're going to need those pieces to be consistently where they're supposed to be. Two guys are just that high variance and also will fight the opposing team's defensive backs and lead the league in penalties. It's just too much to have in one room. It's too much to have on the field at the same time. And that was a big concern too.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. To me, it says nothing about how they view themselves this year, next year, anything. I just think they wanted out on George Pickens. They were just not in the George Pickens business, and they had an opportunity to get DK Metcalf, who is obviously a better player than George Pickens, a more consistent, I believe, leader from everything that you hear, a more, you can tell me maybe a more willing blocker, just everything that DK Metcalf brings you. They are betting huge on him as a core difference maker. And the second he was on their team, they just were out on George Pickens because of the off the field stuff, because maybe some inconsistencies as a player, and they just waited until the moment that they got the right price for him. And that ultimately, I think they believe in their system enough for what it's worth. I don't think they necessarily should, that it's not going to hurt their winning or losing ledger to get rid of George Pickens for this year. And eventually they got what they felt like was a fair price. I'd ask you, as someone who is a closet Steelers fan, or maybe you're out of the closet. No, I don't really know.
It's just out there. Yeah.
Okay. You're good. Yes. Everyone check out John, by the way, subscribe him on Audibles and Analytics and get his great Steelers writing, some Bucks writing, and then you get the great podcast he does with Ollie Connolly. Where were you at with Pickens's development as a player and kind of who he was after 3 years? Because he's one of those draft evaluations that I think almost no matter what you say, you can say you were right 3 years into his career, because you've seen the ceiling plays. He obviously is better talent-wise than where he got taken in the draft, but you've also seen the downside of what people were worried about coming into the league.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key aspects of this is the fit in today's modern NFL with who George Pickens is as a player. There are no question he catches the ball at an extremely high level, and he can make plays in the vertical portion of the field. But you and I know, Greg, that NFL offense asks wide receivers to do much more than this in today's league, especially more than ever before. If you don't know where all the pieces are moving, with how condensed the league is and how much they're bringing receivers in and reducing their split and saying, you need to play close to the core of the formation. And if we're in a run, you need to contribute. And if we're in a pass, you need to know how the routes distribute. How do the routes distribute and break up from that point on the field? And that's what teams need from their wide receiver position, especially Arthur Smith. Like, he needs this from his wide receiver position. If you remember back to before Russell Wilson became the starter in Pittsburgh, Van Jefferson outsnapped George Pickens in a couple games. That wasn't because Van Jefferson's better than George Pickens. That was because they just simply viewed Van Jefferson as a more ideal piece for the types of things they like to do in terms of bringing a receiver close to the line of scrimmage. Now, the Arthur Smith conversation, we don't have time for, Greg. I am very anti. I am not suggesting in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I railed against it at the time that was a wise way to do things. It was not. But I'm saying that if this is the offensive coordinator you're committed to, and other offenses as well, you need players who are going to be able to play close to the core of the formation, from reduced splits, from condensed alignments, and be able to distribute their routes from there appropriately, as well as work the middle of the field. The struggle with Pickens is that the things he's really good at are really valuable, but they're never valuable in a volume sense. Like, you are rarely going to be in a game script or a game situation in which he is getting a massive volume of plays. Now, could he be developed into something more? I'm open to that. Steelers coaching, I've been, offensive coaching especially, I've been highly critical of for years. So I think it's possible, but also who he is as a player, just knowing kind of his demeanor and his disposition and kind of where he wants to play. And, there's just not a lot of crispness and attention to detail in his game. And to me, that's where he can develop into something more. I hope, but I really would be surprised. I think he is generally who he is. You are going to see great things in flashes. You're going to be incredibly frustrated at times with who he is. I don't think he's this diva that he's painted out to be, but I do think there is a player who is, in his usefulness to the league and in what he can do in every role, every route basis, is really limited in that way. Now, his strengths in a better system, and I do think CeeDee Lamb is a great complement to him. I think that part of it is probably the most exciting part for Dallas. He can be effective in that specific role for Dallas, I think.
Yeah, that's the thing, is the fit, I think, in Dallas is as perfect as it could be for George Pickens for this portion of his career. Still just 24 years old, just turned 24 in March, has a lot of potential. Although I did want to just stop you and ask, why don't you think he's the diva that he's painted out to be before we move to the Cowboys fit?
I just think he's an interesting person. I don't think he's not Deontay Johnson, where Deontay Johnson would get off the field and rage in the locker room that he didn't get that's not the kind of player we're talking about here. This guy is just kind of oblivious more than anything. Pickens kind of lives in his own world. A defensive back slights him. He body slams the guy in the play. He's just kind of like a short fuse, narrow focus guy, doesn't always sense the full moving picture. I think he leaves the field after a game, and in 10 seconds it's gone. It's just flushed, whether it's good or bad. This guy didn't know that Joey Porter Jr. made the first interception of his career in the game against Baltimore when he picks off Lamar Jackson in the end zone, one of the biggest games of the year. They asked about it in the post-game presser. He had no idea. He's like, Joey Porter going to pick tonight? It was the biggest play of the game. He didn't know that Matt Canada was fired until the next day when he came into the building. He didn't know that it happened on a Tuesday. He came in Wednesday morning. He was talking to me. He's like, I just found out when I came in. I'm like, so that's the kind of guy we're talking about. I just think he's it's George Pickens focused, but it's not in an antagonistic way at all.
And yet, when he is in the air and there's a defensive back in front of him and he's trying to pluck that ball out of the air, he's kind of a genius. It's why I loved him so much coming out of Georgia. There was just enough of those plays, and maybe he hasn't developed enough as a route runner and a separator and all that, but there were enough of those plays that I saw that and I thought, that's got to work. Unless he's a total knucklehead, and I don't think in terms of loving to play the game, he exhibits a love of playing the game when he's out there. He's competitive. I think that's got to work, and I think it's important to mention as we kind of transition to Dallas that it has worked. In 3 years, this is what he's done. He's caught 174 passes for almost 3,000 yards, 2,800 yards. So he's averaged almost 1,000 yards a season. He led the NFL in yards per catch in his second year as a 22-year-old, 18.1 yards per catch. He's averaged 16.3 yards per catch for his career. I'm not saying that he's a number one that you build an offense around, but that's fantastic production just looking at it from a late second round pick. And now you go to Dallas where you're not the number one. And now we'll get into the fit a little bit with CeeDee Lamb. You are with a quarterback, Dak Prescott, who I feel like I haven't talked about at all this offseason. And I'm sort of fascinated what he's going to look like now in this Brian Schottenheimer offense. And you bring Clayton Adams over from Arizona, but it doesn't seem like they're really, making an Arizona type of offense. But you're with a guy in CeeDee Lamb it's so talented, and you're going to be on the outside, in theory, in that Michael Gallup type of role, but a better version of it. And you're with a guy in Dak Prescott who throws a beautiful deep ball. It's probably a better fit. And the thing it reminded me of is the Cowboys have had some success with getting these receivers in for the honeymoon season. And hearing that George Pickens doesn't want to sign a contract right now because he wants to go off, you would think you're going to get the best version of George Pickens this year, like Roy Williams way back in the day, or T.O. when they brought him back in the day. I do think you'll probably get the best version of Pickens. He's with a great quarterback and a great wide receiver. And that's why for the Cowboys, a 3rd-round pick, even without the long-term security, I think they're trying to win this year. I think it makes sense for them.
If it's going to work for them, George Pickens needs to get back to being the best, like above the rim contested catch receiver in the NFL. That's really the path, because I would be just shocked if all the rough edges of his game ever round out, but they don't necessarily need that from him. You mentioned it, right? With CeeDee Lamb, he doesn't need to be the number one option. He doesn't need to be the guy you run your offense through. He needs to be the splash play creator. And the biggest way he can do that is when he gets 5 targets a game, because that might be what it is in this offense in his role. When he gets that sort of distribution in the passing game, can he make 3 of those awesome plays down the field? Can he be the guy who leads the league in average yards per catch, who is back up near his rookie year, one of the best contested catch seasons I have ever seen, 19 to 28 in contested situations per PFF, 68%. Since then, it just hasn't been anywhere close. He's a little under 35% over the last 2 years combined in those situations, still in just about as many situations per year. So that part hasn't changed, but some of that is ball placement, which will be better with Dak. So I do think that part will matter. Watching him, obviously, every snap, I think some of it's on the quarterback. I think some of it is, it's hard to live that way as a receiver in a high volume role in contested spots. In this role, in this offense, I think it's going to change. So I'm with you. I think that his best ball could easily be played this year. I think the fit with Dak Prescott is good. The question's just like, how many mistakes will there be? Penalties, fumbles are a big part of it. Drops, how much mistakes will there be in terms of focus and execution? The lid he kind of puts on your offense in terms of how you can use them, I think might be a factor. But overall, I do think it's exciting for Dallas. It's just a matter of this year, what's the ceiling for the whole team? And then you gave up this 3rd. Can it be enough? Can you get him in a longer term deal? Is that even of interest to you? Do you want to pay 2 wide receivers big? If not, was this the right move? Those are kind of the more existential questions I think that surround the team after this move.
Dallas does not do well with the existential questions. They do a lot of work looking at their old draft profiles and being like, oh, well, we can fix them. We want that to work. I mean, they had a completely bizarre offseason at running back, bringing in Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders, just like, really, that's what you're going to do. But it was the trades that caught my eye. It was the Kenneth Murray trade, and like Kyer Elam's on this roster, right? Yeah, they traded for him too. It's just like, well, we trust our draft, profile, and we're going to just give him a shot and see if that can work. The same thing they did with Mingo. But I think this is an upper tier version of that. And when I mentioned selfishly at the beginning, it makes me happier. It's just like, I want to see Dak with a chance here. This is not necessarily a bad team. It's a good defensive roster. Yeah. It's a good quarterback. The offensive line, if it broke right, has a chance to be pretty good, or certainly like league average and improved. I think they have a chance. This puts the Tyler Booker pick maybe into like a little bit of different light. Do you look at their draft any differently now? Because like that was the debate at 12. You would have thought they would have taken Matthew Golden there, maybe Igbuka. That's what I thought they were going to do. And they take Tyler Booker, and they're going to be on TV, John, whether you like it or not. And I just feel like they're going to be more entertaining and competitive. And that's all I really care about. I'm not a Cowboys fan.
I agree with that. I mean, again, I think that you can quibble with the move, and you can certainly find flaws and say like, hey, this is a risk, and we could look back and it could look bad. There's no doubt. But again, if you don't have any risk, like what are you doing? There was no way Dallas was getting out of it this offseason if they were not going to improve unless they took on some level of risk. You have to take it on. So I was surprised by one thing, Greg, I think is worth pointing out. I thought they really, like, negotiating wise, maybe they lost the plot a little bit, and that where they ended up giving up is interesting, because before the draft they're offering a 4th. It sounds like it was, and that was kind of what I heard at the time, was that Dallas and maybe some other teams were interested in day 3. They would give up a day 3 pick for Pickens before or during the draft, but there really wasn't a day 2 pick on the table, and that's what Pittsburgh wanted, obviously. So Pittsburgh kind of waits it out. I'm not sure where they were at, whether they were somebody will eventually come around, or we'll just keep him if we're not getting any good compensation for him. Obviously, I think they wanted to move him, but they just didn't want to surrender him for nothing. They end up getting the 2026 third round pick from Dallas and a favorable day 3 swap for them, which surprised me. I thought they would be the one. That's a part.
I agree. To be clear, they got a day 3 swap where they moved the Steelers moved up from the 6th to the 5th. Not a huge deal, but I was surprised that they had to, throw an extra to make it happen.
Yeah, that part was interesting to me, but either way, I think they end up with the day 2 pick in 2026. Now, I actually think for Dallas, they clearly preferred that to giving one up in 2025. For Pittsburgh, I actually like the 2026 one. I mean, knowing where Dallas is sort of in the order maybe was favorable to them because Dallas was picking higher than. I mean, that's probably right around the range for them. Maybe they'll be they hope to be a little bit lower, obviously this year. But I think for Pittsburgh, that 2026 draft, specifically at positions they might need, to me, I wasn't as high on the wide receiver class this year as I know some people were. I think the cornerback class was one of the weakest in years in terms of where it dropped off after the top guys. So if you're looking at third round picks this year, the talent at those spots, and then especially in the offensive line, which is 3 position groups I expect the Steelers will be really interested in outside of quarterback next year. Really not ideal for the Steelers this year. And then also quarterback, right? Next year's probably a year that they want to be in position to maybe make a move. So to me, the pick in 2026 is actually more valuable to the Steelers given their long-term, whether you want to say it's goals, I'm hoping it's goals, whether it's goals or where they just will be inevitably, whether they like it or not. I think that 2026 pick actually ends up making more sense for them and maybe more sense for Dallas too. I am just surprised that Dallas was willing to give that up because I don't think there was another team from what I've heard was willing to give up that kind of compensation for Pickens.
Maybe my old boss, Florio, helped push it along because he wrote an article on Tuesday or on Monday rather saying Jerry Jones said during the draft, hey, we've got these big trades coming. We're working on a big trade. Wait and see it. And he writes this article. It's like, hey, where's that big trade you were talking about? And it was now in hindsight, probably always clearly this George Pickens. They were probably working on it. I have a feeling and felt good that at some point it was going to happen. But maybe he pushed it over the goal line asking for it. Like you'd be surprised how things happen in this league. Quickly on the Steelers, and then we'll get to just some other news. I'll say goodbye to you. DK Metcalf is their number 1. Like that is a huge upgrade, but man, the rest of their receiver group is rough. Robert Woods, people are expecting is like I don't know if Robert Woods is going to make that team. He wasn't able to contribute to Houston last year. The contract doesn't indicate that he's necessarily even definitely on the team. We'll see. Obviously a great career, but he's at the end of it. Calvin Austin, who has been an okay role player, I guess, as like your 4. Scotty Miller, Roman Wilson, their 3rd round pick from a year ago, who they hope develops into a slot guy. Ben Skoranek. I mean, it's rough. There are some receivers out there. Amari Cooper is still out there. Keenan Allen is still out there. Gabe Davis is now out there. There are guys. I feel like they need to add one of those guys just as like another professional to give a shot.
Yeah, remember we're talking about Arthur Smith again, and I want to be on the record. I am not recommending this. Do not try this at home, kids. Do not try this offense at home. However, Greg, this is an offense that we know over the years with Arthur Smith, he said, give me one guy to run the passing attack through. Give me a playable option at tight end. They have those 2 things. The other receivers need to be able to just fill roles. That's what he wants. And so when you look at the group, yes, I agree with you. In a vacuum, Robert Woods probably should be, will he make it, will he not, going into the season? In reality, he's probably going to make it, and he's probably going to make it. At this
point, yeah.
Because he can play condensed, he's an adult in the room, and he can block. And those are 3 things that he wants. I mean, who was his number 2? Mac Hollins was the guy that he valued as his number 2. Like, that's what he wants. He wants guys who can do that tough guy stuff over the middle of the field. Skowronek fits that mold. They're hoping that Roman Wilson fits that mold as well. That'll be a big question. He was hurt like last year. He kept getting nicked up. So whether he can fill that role, I was lower on him than consensus. Again, for the record, I'm trying to explain the Steelers' perspective. I don't think there's a great other option in the room at all. Calvin Austin is a different type of player, like a vertical threat wide receiver from the slot, who I think can replace some of the like pass obvious downs, field stretching ability. He's a guy that actually I thought was really similar to Jalen Noel, since we've been talking draft recently, for people liking guys that the vertical threat from the slot, just running every route at full speed, stretches the field for everybody else. So at least guys that can fit. Again, it's more of who can fill the role and function in the actual offensive system, even if they're not graded or have no special traits at it, rather than who's the most talented guy. And fans sort of think of, oh, Pickens is more talented, 100%. Can the other guys just literally run what Arthur Smith needs them to do better and more versatile than Pickens? Perhaps. However, I would say the ceiling on that offense of structure and idea is so incredibly low. Never tried at home, as I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I just mean there's some other guys who can play it like. Yeah, let's get into the rest of the news. Gabe Davis got cut by the Jaguars, which is quite a statement considering they owed him $11 million guaranteed this year. A total disaster of a signing, but showed in Buffalo he could be a useful enough role player as a vertical threat. He should be on a team somewhere, and maybe that's the bet they're making, that there's offsets in his contract and they'll have to pay slightly less. But man, that was a bold statement. Like, whether it's a Gabe Davis, I don't know if Keenan Allen makes sense. I don't know if Amari Cooper makes sense. I just mean you are a DK Metcalf hamstring injury away from just I don't know how you're throwing a forward pass if you're the Steelers. Any thoughts on Gabe Davis now available?
Yeah, he'd be interesting, I think. I mean, when he was in Buffalo, I feel just the verticality of who he is as a player feels like it would be valuable for an offense that needed that. Now, the Steelers have a couple of those types of pieces. The type of piece they really need is like what Robert Woods was in his prime, or, I don't think they were going to take Emeka Egbuka, but like that type of player. Again, they probably weren't going to take him even if the Bucs didn't, because they don't really value that role in this offense, that wide receiver 2 role. So it's just a value proposition, I think, to them. And so I think from their perspective, like if they were going to be at their best or most effective as an offense, just you're looking across the league, forget Arthur Smith, a player like that who could block, work condensed, work the middle of the field, make tough catches, that would be the prototype of what they'd be looking for. So I think hoping that Robert Woods can provide that is probably, not ideal. Could Gabe Davis fill a role? Could he be, a piece on this team, given where their core's at? For sure. That's possible. I think Keenan Allen's about cooked. I'm not sure I'd be that interested.
Yeah, I agree. I'm naming him because I'm regretting putting him in my top 101 at the end. I think he was at 83. He finished the season with some production, and he's Keenan Allen. There's always some hope that he could bounce back, but it's thin out there. Those players are not easier to find. Knowing the Steelers lately, they're more likely to wait till cut down and then sign like Braxton Berrios from the Texans as their 4th receiver or something like that. Because
Lazard's names come up.
Actually, yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. Alan Lazard, if Rodgers is there, his binky could come with him. It kind of makes sense.
The jokes write themselves.
The thing is, can Rodgers even? I don't think he could take advantage of George Pickens at this point of his career. He just is unwilling to go deep down the field. Can he get the best out of DK Metcalf? We'll see. I did want to mention Dallas Goedert reportedly is agreeing to a rework deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles had made it pretty clear all offseason that he was potentially available for a trade. Definitely. We're kind of putting the screws to him, I believe, to take some sort of pay cut. We don't have the details on that yet, but I would expect that he took some sort of pay cut to stay. So that's a win for the Eagles.
Yeah, I think it always made more sense for him to stay, in my opinion. Like, I just felt like he's a pivotal piece when he's healthy for them, I think, because they ask him to do stuff not every tight end in the league can do, and they've really developed him. They've kind of made the monster. And when Tucker Kraft came out, I was like, I hope he can be Dallas Goedert like that. And I think he's on that path to be that type of player. But I think just what Goedert does as a blocker on the move, how he can play from different alignments, the fact that he can catch screen, he can line up as a wideout and legitimately run those routes, catch screens and be a threat. He's not dominant maybe at any one thing. Maybe, at times as a blocker when he's been healthy, there's been some really nice stretches for him, but he's really good at a lot of different stuff. And they really need a piece like that with where they're at in their window. It sort of made sense that they found a way to stay together. And I'm glad that they did.
Yeah. I'm always a little dubious of on-off splits, or the equivalents in football. But man, when he wasn't on the field, you felt that difference because it was such a big fall off from their 2 great outside receivers to not really having anyone reliable inside. So I'm glad they worked that out. But I think it was just they felt like they couldn't rely on him to stay on the field enough. But they got through the draft. They didn't end up with a high pick tight end, and they're all going to be back there on offense for 2025, which helps Jalen Hurts out a lot. And then before we go, I just wanted to kind of close the circle on Monday's show. We actually talked at length about the Justin Tucker situation. and the wording that John Harbaugh had about how interesting it was. He said, football decisions. If we cut Justin Tucker, it will be a football decision. And in fact, since we talked about it, they did cut him. And that was the most notable thing about it for me. The quote from Eric DaCosta when they released him, he said, sometimes football decisions are incredibly difficult. This is one of those instances. And then the tone of it, very complimentary of Justin Tucker and how tough it was to release him. And they sincerely wish him and his family the very best in this next chapter of their lives. And I just wanted to say, well, I found the tone of it off-putting with the 16 sexual assault allegations that went into it and them leading with football decisions so clearly in their statement. I also just think it was a legal thing that they do not want Justin Tucker or the NFLPA to come after them. And frankly, I would have expected them to bring in another kicker and potentially cut Tucker or make him compete for his job this year anyways. And I don't necessarily believe that the off-field stuff didn't have a factor, but that's just what they put because they are covering their own ass. We have seen that a lot in the NFL. You have covered us gloriously, Jon Ledyard. I'm going to get you off to your day because I know you're busy, but I appreciate you stepping in at the last second and talking a little George Pickens to the Cowboys. The Cowboys are going to be more interesting. I don't know if that'll be true with the Steelers, if it's like Mason Rudolph throwing to Roman Wilson in week 4.
2026, 2027, maybe. Not in 2025.
No, but I do expect Rodgers is going to be there eventually. Sorry about that, John. Wrap it up. We will be back for our final show of the week. It's actually going to go up Friday morning. That's going to be with Nick Shook. Very excited about that one. Until then, yes, the Dallas Cowboys actually giving us some news to talk about in the middle of May. Thank you, Jerry Jones. Football's back.